And welcome back to Consumer Choice Radio on the Big Talker 106.7 FM every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. We're speaking with Commissioner Brendan Carr of the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, someone who's been very prominent in the news and who has been someone that we've been following at the Consumer Choice Center for a while. So, Commissioner, thanks so much for taking the time to come on our program.
Great to join you all. Really appreciate it.
Of course. So this is obviously a perfect time where everyone is connected, everyone's online. There's a lot of people who are using tools they've never used before, and there's a lot of pressure on the internet infrastructure. So I guess first question to throw it up, what is the FCC kind of doing around this time? What are you prioritizing? What should people know about the work that FCC is doing with our internet, our online platforms, and everything else that's out there?
Well, look, Americans more than ever before are relying on their home internet connections for so much today as we've been sheltering in place during this COVID pandemic. So a lot of us are working from home. We are trying to teach our kids through distant learning technologies, accessing telehealth. So there's been really a surprise stress test of the internet infrastructure. And it's held up surprisingly well. Not really surprising to me, but perhaps surprising to other people. We've seen an increase in network traffic on the wired networks, roughly around 20-25%. We've seen a little bit less increase in network traffic on the mobile wireless networks, anywhere from 1 or 2% to less than 10%. I think that reflects in part that so many people are staying home and staying put. And it's actually a good thing because our wired connections have far greater capacity than our mobile wireless. So the networks have been performing very well. I think it's a reflection of the regulatory status we've had. We've incentivized private sector to invest in the networks. And so U.S. networks really have been outperforming networks in a lot of other parts of the world.
And when you say, like, if you could maybe quantify that for some of our listeners, because I know a lot of people will be interested to know, like, wow, how much or how much better is the U.S. System doing? Can you quantify that at all for some of our listeners and walk them through what that actually looks like and what some of these performance measures are?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting data that's out there from not just carriers, but third-party providers. There's a group actually out of Australia that I've been talking to pretty frequently called Casper Data House. And folks can go to that website. They actually have an internet pressure map that they've put up that measures the changes in internet pressure essentially in countries around the world. They have a really detailed map you can click through, and it shows the U.S. performing very well right now. And again, this is a measurement of what was the status quo in your country before and after. So it's a very good measure to take a look at.
Oh, that's good to know. We'll try to
Awesome.
include that in our notes.
Yeah. We'll add that to the show notes for sure. On that global side of things, I mean, I bring this up because, full disclosure, I find you to be one of the most entertaining people on Twitter to follow. You very regularly mix it up with official representatives of the Chinese Communist Party. What is it that the American public should know about the Chinese Communist Party and the ongoing domestic debate about 5G and companies like Huawei?
You know, it's interesting. I think for a long time, the debate about U.S. foreign policy with respect to communist China was something you read about in the dusty pages of foreign policy journals. Well, that debate has jumped out of those journals to the kitchen table of everyday Americans. So many people right now are out of work. Their kids are out of school. And I think that's a direct relationship to the oppressive nature of the communist regime. So I think everybody in their daily lives right now feels the consequence of communist China's oppression more than ever before. Early on in December and January, they essentially arrested whistleblowers that tried to warn the world about COVID. They intentionally put out misleading information about human-to-human transmission. I think those early steps by communist China exacerbated the global spread of COVID-19. If they'd acted earlier, there's studies that show that 90 or 95% of this could have been prevented. They talk about this vaunted Wuhan lockdown and that they shouldn't bear any responsibility because they did their part. That couldn't be farther from the truth. They didn't lock down Wuhan until January 21, 24, sometime in there. In the 3 weeks before that, 7 million people of a city of 11 million left Wuhan, including those that were infected, including on direct flights out of the country. So this idea that they locked down Wuhan and prevented the spread just doesn't match up with the facts.
Wow. Yeah, there's definitely more that we're reading about everything with China and its role, and we've tried to cover that on this program. Had a good number of interviews. Staying on that topic, again, David mentioned that you've actually, you're in these Twitter matches slinging with guys who are Department of Propaganda, ministry, whatever. What is that like? Are you receiving any feedback from other people who might be in various agencies or the government? Are you perhaps getting other intelligence or reports about some of these people and their actions? Is this a kind of Russiagate 2.0 that we kind of see coming? I mean, what is happening with the infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party into social media in the U.S.?
Well, look, there's nothing that a communist likes less than hearing the truth spoken freely and spoken loudly. So I've engaged, where I can on my platform on Twitter to engage directly with some of the chief propagandists of that regime. That's resulted in one of their chief propagandists blocking me on Twitter. So I had to stand up a new Twitter account just to keep an eye on the account of that foreign minister for communist China. So I've enjoyed the back and forth and helping to bring truth to light. Because look, the Chinese people themselves are often the most directly and most frequently brutalized by the communist regime. So we've got to draw a very clear distinction between the Chinese people and the communist regime that is engaging in really oppressive conduct.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge point for sure in terms of the people who actually suffer most at the hands of the regime. I always find it ironic when I see official Chinese Communist Party representatives on Twitter, which is a platform that is not available to ordinary Chinese people. So they unfortunately do not get to see you engage with their unelected officials and representatives. Shifting gears from China to some domestic policy, some would maybe say that would make a joke about California's own internal policies and it looking like China. I don't know if I go that far, but AB5 in California, the gig economy legislation. You've written about this policy. Yaël and I have talked about it, about how it puts jobs at risk. From your perspective, what were some of the most problematic aspects of that law?
Look, AB5, which is a state law passed in California, is one of the worst job killers that California has ever passed. And let me tell you, that's saying something given some of the legislation that's come out of there. This is a bill that was backed and pushed by organized labor to try to shut down independent contractors that were working in a range of businesses, not just Uber and Lyft. That's the headline companies that they talk about, but take journalists. You have a lot of contract journalists, and that legislation put a cap and said a journalist working on a contract basis can't write more than 35 stories a year per publication. And that just fails Econ 101. I mean, think about it. When you've got 35 stories out of a journalist and they go to submit that 36th, do you think that the newspaper is going to hire them on full time just to get that 36th story? Of course not. They're going to move on to the next contractor. So it really, in some ways, empowers and disenfranchises, on the other hand, these people that are trying to work. And what's so interesting is just last week or this week even, the California Attorney General filed lawsuit to enforce AB5. Think about that. So many Americans are out of work. Ways to stay in the economy. We should be making it easier for people to lift themselves up, lift their families up and work, not suing to make it harder.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. I mean, Yaël and I spent a lot of time talking to people about why some of these services are important. And like you said, obviously Uber and Lyft are headline companies that people love to go after. Generally speaking, in terms of California, we're seeing more companies leave the state. I'm sure you've probably seen some of the Elon Musk debate on Twitter, which is quite entertaining, about leaving the state for Texas. On that note of some serious pushback online, the FCC and your colleagues have received quite a bit of I don't know how I would describe it other than maybe hate in regards to net neutrality, people beating the drum that the internet was going to close and speeds were going to rapidly decline and you were going to get charged by the minute for every every website or service you use. Can you walk us through where the U.S. is post net neutrality and maybe calm some of those fears from the naysayers that still are beating that drum out there?
Yeah, look, net neutrality was one of the greatest political hoaxes we've seen in this country, and given some of the stuff going on here, that's saying something. To your point, we were told that reversing the 2-year Obama experiment with heavy-handed regulation of the internet, going back to the same bipartisan approach we had for 20 years, was going to be literally the end of the internet. That you have to pay for tweets. I think Banksy had a viral tweet. You have to pay for tweets, or pay extra for this, pay that. There's all kinds of predictions. Not one of them have come true. What has happened? Internet speeds are up about 70% since that decision. Small cells, which are the building blocks for 5G, have gone out at an accelerated clip. More miles of high-speed fiber have gone into the ground than ever before. And the reason the U.S. networks held up so well during the boost in usage during the COVID-19 pandemic was because of all the private sector investment that our reversal of Title II helped unleash. So it's one of those great stories where we were told it was the end of the internet, and it was the end of that old internet, but now we have a better, faster, more competitive internet as there's more providers competing for your broadband dollars than ever before.
Yeah, as someone who has been writing about this since that time, I do have to take a moment and thank you so much for that. It was a lonely path back then to to try to be the one who was defending the idea that we did not need to have this uber control of the internet. That actually innovation is pretty good. And it's one of the main reasons why we're the richest, most successful countries in the world, not because of some government bureau or agency telling us what to do on the internet.
Yeah, and hats off, to Chairman Pai, my fellow commissioner, who obviously is leading the agency, led the agency through that. No one, I think, will ever know really personally what he and his family went through over this policy issue. He was obviously had a lot of death threats. He had to go to 24-hour security protection. There were bomb threats being called in all over this hoax where people on the far left said it was going to be the end of the internet. And if you look at what's happened, it's unbelievable. But he walked that line. He stayed true to his principles, and every single person, including those that called in the bomb threats, are benefiting from a better, faster, cheaper internet. It would have been very easy for him just to walk away and say it's not worth it. It's not worth the personal risk. But he stuck to his guns, and it's a great story.
That's true. I mean, it's been amazing to see. I mean, this is something that just everyone online, massive, online censorship. These are all the banners that we heard back in the day. Everyone's blacking out the screens, for net neutrality. This is kind of one era where we see that, okay, free enterprise has actually delivered something. And actually, you can have good government. You can have good government agencies that respect our rights and our freedoms. So again, applaud you and Commissioner Pai for that. It's been amazing to see. One other question we wanted to get into is you've written and you've been very vocal about the notion of fake news, specifically right now with the coronavirus, or as we call it, the Carol Baskins virus, because we don't want to get censored on these platforms. If we are, now looking at a day and age where social media companies are regulating a lot of things and really trying to siphon out the good information and the bad, you've kind of been public about the new advisory board that they have over at Facebook, sort of like a grand appellate court of the internet. Sort of what are your thoughts on what these platforms are doing? I know people going back and forth as to what the government is allowed to do or not allowed to do, and these are private platforms. Just what do you think of that as a citizen and then also as a commissioner?
Yeah, I've been pretty outspoken on these issues. I think this entire content moderation approach, where you're deciding what people can say, what they can't say, what to take up, what not to put up, it's a fraud endeavor. What people really don't get is these decisions aren't made by some oracle of truth. These decisions are made by people, and they're made by people in power, and they're either biased or they're fallible. And so my approach has always been more speech is better than less speech. Of course, there's First Amendment issues, and these are private platforms. And so I don't speak of this directly as a First Amendment issue when it comes to posts on these platforms. I speak of it as a free speech issue. And I think the culture in this country embraces more speech. And I think that's the best approach. Some people say, okay, fine, political speech, we won't fact check that, although most people do. They'll say, well, what about health and safety? Isn't that an easy, low-hanging fruit? It's never that easy. Take, wearing face masks for COVID-19. Representative Swalwell tweeted about a month or so ago, stop wearing masks. A month later, he reversed course and said, everyone needs to be wearing masks. And so at which point would you have stepped in under health and safety and taken down one of those tweets? That's why I think let's just promote more speech, more information. In the long run, it's a far better approach.
It's actually funny you bring up some of these politicians and what could be considered fake news. One of our previous guests, who's a passionate school choice advocate, there was a long-winded exchange with Elizabeth Warren at the time saying that she sent her kids to public school and she had run these campaign ads about public schools and how she believed in the public school system and her kids and all of that. And then it turned out, obviously, that she sent her children to private school, which we certainly don't criticize her for. But it begs the question, is that fake news now? Is that deceitful? Is she lying? Should she lose her ad accounts with social media platforms? Is she engaging in the actual act that she is so desperately trying to solve with some of her proposals for other regulations? So yeah, it raises some very good hypocritical questions or instances for our audience to look at. In wrapping up, what can Americans expect from the FCC moving forward throughout the remainder of the pandemic? What are maybe some of the big items that you guys have planned in the short term in the next year or so?
Yeah, we've taken a lot of really concrete actions in the last couple of weeks and months. So we've boosted network capacity by adding more spectrum into the commercial marketplace and facilitating spectrum swaps among private providers. We've added more funding to our telehealth programs, our existing ones. We've actually stood up from scratch entirely new telehealth programs to support remote patient monitoring and other technologies where you don't need to go to a brick and mortar facility. We have a new program we stood up to support the connectivity to people in their homes. We've taken action to make sure that families, low-income families, stay connected during the pandemic. So really, we've taken 5 or 6 different categories of actions, and we're going to keep doing that to make sure that Americans stay connected.
Wow. This is exactly why the FCC is now one of our favorite regulatory agencies out there. Definitely. You're listening to Consumer Choice Radio on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. We've been speaking with Commissioner Brendan Carr of the FCC. You can follow him on Twitter at Brendan Carr FCC. You can find him there. Thanks so much, Commissioner, for taking the time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Cheers.